head into the Ringerverse to stay up to date with all things superheroes and nerd culture entertainment. Hosted by a rotating lineup of superfans at The Ringer, including Mallory Rubin and Van Lathan, shows will provide instant reactions to blockbuster releases, insightful backstories on canon, and mind-bending theories, as well as fresh takes on the latest news and rumors. Check out The Ringerverse on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts.
This episode is brought to you by eBay Authenticity Guarantee. eBay knows that when it comes to jewelry, authenticity is the real gem. When you see the blue check mark that says Authenticity Guarantee, it means your next piece will be carefully inspired by jewelry experts and will always be worth its weight in gold. Whether you're looking to make a statement or build the perfect everyday look, eBay is making sure you get the real deal. With eBay Authenticity Guarantee, you can trust that jaw-dropping piece will always arrive jaw-droppingly real. Ensure your next purchase is the real deal. Visit ebay.com for terms. This episode is brought to you by Visible. Maybe you've already let your New Year's resolution slip. We all have, but you can still make a 2 year's resolution with Visible. Right now, you can get a one-line wireless plan from Visible for just $20 per month for 24 months. 24 months is basically 4 bachelor seasons. That could be 4 engagements, 4 broken engagements. So many other couples we didn't see coming. It's really an eternity in Bachelor Nation. And that's unlimited 5G data powered by Verizon with no annual contracts. Switch now at Visible.com and use the code VISIBLE24. Don't miss out. Offer ends January 31st. New members only. Promotional rate with service on the Visible plan. For additional terms and network management practices, see Visible.com. Welcome to Bachelor Party. As you know, it's Fantasy Suites week, and as such, I'm joined by my Fantasy Suite enthusiast, Mallory Rubin. Hi, Mal. I've missed you.
Juliet, I want to kiss you. I want to hold you. I want to wake up next to you. Nowhere I'd rather be on Fantasy Suite week than here with you.
You know
my
I don't
tradition.
I don't like Brandon. Come on.
Had to open with a Brandon quote just for you.
1 to 10, how shocked were you by the outcome of this week's episode?
Like a 47. I was astounded. I'm still processing it. I did rewatch the episode to see if I could pick up on clues, like how much of it was that I didn't feel like the edit foretold what was to come, either inside the episode or the season, and how much of it was just that I was so sure Joe would be in the final 2 the entire way that I literally never considered an alternative. I think it was mostly that, because on a rewatch, I was like, all right,
See
there's
some cracks?
a decent amount here that you can parse both in favor of her picking Brandon and some signs and clues that indicated Joe might be the one who was in trouble. But there also was plenty that you can hang on to and say, this sounds like she's picking Joe, particularly the morning after the Fantasy Suite. So I was astounded, frankly. And that's not, I like Brandon. I was just not living in a world where I thought Joe wouldn't be in the final 2. I was shocked.
Do you like Brandon? We'll obviously talk about Joe, but just to establish some, we haven't talked about this that much.
We haven't talked about
together.
the season that much. Yeah, I know.
Do you like Brandon as a potential fiance, or do you like Brandon as like your babysitter when you're 12? Like your hot babysitter? I'm so mean to Brandon. I don't know why. I just can't. He's just not for me. He seems really nice, but he's just not for me. I'm sorry. I'm so mean.
I liked everyone in the final 4.
Sure. Good final 4.
And I really like Nate. I'm excited to talk to you about Nate, especially now that you've flipped on Nate. I'm very pro Nate. It will not surprise you to hear. I liked Joe and I like Brandon. I just think it's like a strong group of guys. I think that the connections that she has with all of them seemed quite different. Why do I like Brandon? I mean, I think I like Brandon because he seems like the purest soul who's ever walked the earth. And he is just like emotion and sentiment given form. Mm-hmm. And I find it so charming and also a little bit shocking and difficult to like wrap my arms around, but in a way where that like I like watching him and them interact. And I think, okay, a lot of what Brandon says, you and Callie talked about this, like it's often a sentiment or a line that you could see in a movie script, right? And I think that part of why I've been very charmed by Brandon, just again, because he seems like such a nurturing, kind, and caring person, But more broadly, I'm kind of in awe of the fact that he is like comfortable saying things out loud that most people aren't. I really like admire that because it's not a skill that I possess. And so when other people do that, I'm just like, wow, I would be so like, I would never have the confidence. My own mortification would prevent me from ever voicing the thing that you just voiced, not only to another human being who can hear you, but to legions watching you at home who can also hear you. So I just think that's kind of great. Good for him. He's just so sweet.
He's just sweet. He just goes for it. I'm sort of like, how did he get this way? I'm just so confused by all of it. On your rewatch of this episode, what were the like moments where you're like, oh, they're setting the table for Joe going home? Like, what were some of the indicators to you? Because I thought about this as well.
So I think there were a couple primary things. One is just that she kept noting that they were further behind. Like, kept noting.
Yes,
right?
That caught my attention as well, which was particularly interesting because we didn't hear that at any other point or get that feeling. Like, my friend Sarah reminded me that I didn't ever think Joe was going to win or go to the final two because I thought he would like, I just didn't think he could like emotionally get there. But it seemed like I had like kind of like forgotten that I thought that because there's just been sort of like no one else but like Joe and Nate. I'm just like, who else is even in the running here? Because the way it was edited made him seem like such a front runner the whole time because he's so handsome. And I was going to say lovable, but I'm actually not sure he is lovable. Not because he's like a bad guy, but I feel like this week, as we did see more of him, he just kind of seemed boring to me. But maybe that's just because he doesn't know how to like turn it up for the cameras.
I thought that he was charming and showed us more of himself in this episode. And that also kind of on the initial watch maybe masked some of the inevitability of what was to come, because again, you take this fact that Michelle keeps reiterating, like, I need to see more, I need to get that clarity, I need to get that certainty. And then in theory, he is giving her the thing that she's asking for. And you say, okay, well, we checked that box then, like he'll sail into the final two. But it was very clear, I think, on a rewatch that she just had more questions maybe about where they stood than she did about Brandon and obviously about Nate. The other thing that really stood out to me on a rewatch was how often she emphasized, and this is not unique in this episode, this is a through line, but how often she emphasized that he was like a slice of home, right?
Yeah.
Minnesota Joe in Mexico, you're my slice of home. Like she said at one point, I needed this date today because you've been this little slice of home. You definitely bring that for me. And most of the way I thought, oh, this is like this very meaningful thing. They share this connection through basketball. They share a connection through Minnesota. But at a certain point, when you look at that through a slightly different lens, the lens of what we know unfolds, it's like, well, reminding somebody of home isn't necessarily the foundation for building a life together, right?
Sure.
So it almost is like that's more the past than the future.
Sure.
And that really stood out. I did think, though, and also she had that line about how he was like a 1,000-piece puzzle and she likes puzzles, but here are the pieces that are missing. It's like, okay.
That resonated
in hindsight,
for me
some signs. You love puzzles.
You know, I love puzzles. So I was like, yes, Michelle, I totally get that. I also thought that like their morning after, even though they were like very sweet in bed, was a little bit I went back to that and I was like, this is a little bit more like serious conversation. Like it feels like she didn't get everything that she needed. And so like they talked more the next morning. I just thought that seemed less playful than the other two mornings, even if Brandon was too playful.
Counterpoint, the one most confusing thing still is the breakfast exchange where she says, I definitely have breakfast next time. I got you.
Yeah,
he says, you got me. And she says, I'll repay the favor. And then he says, so there's a next time.
That's true.
And she like giggled, yes. And then he said, I love that. So that made me wonder if she actually changed her mind.
Right.
Either because of the exchange with Brandon at the rose ceremony, or maybe more likely woke up feeling really great about the time that they spent together, feeling in the moment like those questions that she had were in fact answered, enjoyed the time, right? We wake up, you're in the glow of the fantasy suite that evening together, no cameras. And then with a little more distance, all of those same questions that she had heading in just pop back up. And the relationship was just a little bit further behind. But she literally said, I'll get breakfast next time. She thought there was going to be a next time. That's weird, right?
What I hate? I hate when someone you're dating is like, yeah, we'll do this in the future. And then the future never materializes. It's so mean. It's like, you thought that it's like you could see it and it seemed appealing to you for like a second. And then you're like, nah, actually, I don't want that. That's what happened with Joe and Michelle. It's so rude. I just thought that their morning after, Jacoby and I used to really fixate on the post-coital moments.
Of course.
And I just thought it seemed like less fun. Even if she was like, yeah, there'll be a next time. It just seemed, I don't know, more serious. But maybe that's just him. I think that I would like that though. Like, I mean, I was, extremely pro Nate more than Joe. But based on this alone, I'm like, no, I'm in on Joe. Although I do think for some reason, him like having her go first on the zip line, not because like she wanted to, but because he was like afraid, is kind of like a dick move. Callie and I talked about that too.
I love that. I thought that was cute.
I liked when he was like yelling to her, like she could actually hear. Maybe she could. It's like kind of like over at Canyon, but I was like, oh, it was just so weird. I think it's just a bummer that he finally seems like he's getting comfortable on camera and now he's gone.
Yes, and he seemed quite deflated about that very aspect of this. You open up your heart and this is what happens. I thought Joe was a delight. I was really sad to see him go. Again, this is not an anti-Brandon sentiment. I like Brandon too. I wish all three of them could have somehow made it to the final two. But I can say this about the morning after. The one thing from the three morning afters that I can assure you I would not want to partake in any respect is having somebody shove food in my face in bed. Absolutely not.
I don't like eating in bed. Callie and I discussed that too. That's a no. That's a no for me.
If you're going to bring food into the bed, I wanted to have a very different tenor.
You're more of a Riley and Marissa type.
They're a little more into the toe action, I think.
The food fighting is just so gross. That's a big no for me. I think a key difference also, it seemed like with the Nate date versus the Joe date, that she didn't have to push Nate really to like share how he was feeling and like share how this was different. Or with Joe, every step of the way, it seemed like she had to like tee him up. And with Nate, obviously she sort of like, called back to the hometown, but I felt like he was really the driver of the conversation of like, no, I'm ready. That was so meaningful. Whereas with Joe, she had to push that along a little bit more.
Interesting. I thought that Nate, at least in the way it was edited and presented, it felt like that was the conversation where she really was like, I need answers to these X number of questions, right? To the point where it was like falling in love, being in love, and engagement. Like, which of those are you ready for, right? And really needed to like hear a certain thing from him. But I guess the distinction is that feels more like about seeking the affirmation for the thing that she already wanted and felt. Whereas with Joe, it was like parsing a possibility that ultimately wasn't there.
And I think once she kind of like put the framework up, Nate seemed like in his own way nervous and like sort of like a little bit like overly energetic and sort of like letting her know that he was ready, or that like he's like ready to take all these next steps.
Yes.
Let's discuss Nate a little bit further. So you're pro Nate, huh?
I love Nate.
Are you worried that Nate is too big of a fuckboy for Michelle?
No, I don't think so, but I don't know. I mean, what do we really know about anyone who's on this show ever, right? Or how their relationships will go after the fact. I do think it's notable that Nate and Brandon are quite different in terms of, that aspect of their relationships, probably many other aspects of their lives. It seems like she's giving herself two really distinct choices, right? Demeanor, the way they express their feelings, like all of it. So I don't know, maybe there's the like safety of Brandon, the comfort of somebody saying constantly like, I will always put you first, to the point where I'm going to pull you aside to remind you that I told you I'd put you first.
Yeah.
And Nate, his whole thing in this episode, which I honestly liked and found refreshing, was like, if you could see everything about where your life is going, then that's not really an interesting life. So I find the way that he leans in to the unpredictable aspects of his life and their potential future together to honestly be refreshingly honest. Like, you don't really know what it's going to be like outside of this. And again, I find Brandon's like hopeless romantic side to be quite winning, but Nate is more practical about it.
Sure.
And I think that that's like compelling. He's also just obviously like incredibly handsome and cool and suave and confident.
The Nate
he's smart.
confidence
He's well spoken.
Is off the charts.
Great.
I mean, I don't know that we've ever seen this type of confidence on this show before. It's kind of like, it's just like wild. It's so appealing, right? Like,
yeah, because he's managed to not tip over into the arrogant line. I think he's obviously some of the guys disagreed, but
I think he's a little bit arrogant. I mean, I thought the way that he was talking to Brandon was like just straight up rude. Like, I just thought it seemed like
about going first or third.
Yeah, and how he was just like making it worse for Brandon. I feel like you could like see Brandon, like his anxiety rising throughout the episode until at the very end, you know, he pulls her aside to see if she's going home. So if she changed her mind, like, what do you think changed her mind from Joe to Brandon? Nate, obviously, you know, he had that locked up.
Nate was a lock.
Yeah. And that's why he got the rose first. If you think she changed her mind, what do you think she changed it based on?
I think ultimately she didn't change her mind. And that actually is the bigger surprise, right? Is that it wasn't going to be Joe. It was Nate and Brandon. And there was maybe
like
a
she
moment.
Really enjoys Brandon. It's weird.
Yeah, she loves being around him. He makes her happy, right? He makes her feel good. And he does seem not just dedicated, but like devoted in a way that has to, especially inside of this pressure cooker, compressed, accelerated environment, very appealing. Because what's the through line of every season, no matter how different the seasons are? Like, I don't want to make the wrong choice at the end. I don't want to pick somebody who's less into me than I am into them. That's not a concern with Brandon. No matter what, Brandon is going to be the one who's more into it, right? So there's like a comfort there. Again, like I think the moment where she promised Joe a future breakfast was confusing in hindsight and made me think that he was in. And I think your point about Brandon's anxiety, that was like heightened across the episode. He seemed so anxious and so worried about going home. Again, I think he just is like so forthright and says things aloud. Like, it's like, how do you think this other guy's date is going? Probably going pretty well. I think it's probably going well. Like, I think they're probably having a good time together. She has these connections with other people. Like, that is actually kind of uncommon inside of the Bachelor universe to hear people acknowledge things like that. Like,
I know
Nate's confidence is rare, but Nate's like, I can't think about this is a little more traditional.
Yeah,
right?
Totally. Absolutely. But he doesn't say it like in a nervous way. Like, and maybe this is like a gendered stereotype, but I think it's true for both the men and the women, but particularly the women. I think very frequently they have to like block out the reality of the lead being with other people. I mean, I'm projecting because I could not handle it. Like, absolutely could not.
Same.
And so
but I couldn't handle being on either side of it.
Me, of course not. I'm like a competitive and jealous person, and also like worry about like other people's opinions. So if any of that falls into you, like, I feel like I'd be like Ben Higgins, like lead, like melting on the bathroom floor. And I can't imagine it. What was so amazing not amazing, but like striking about Nate was like his confidence was like, nah, I don't care. Like, he's just like, I got this. And I'm just like, has Nate ever been rejected? Like, is that something that's ever happened to him? Probably not.
But I think that's why I enjoy him so much. He does seem to care about Michelle, and he does seem to care about the relationship. He just doesn't seem to care basically about the show and the trappings of the show around them. And that's like especially on this season where there was always this like drama of the week for so much of it. And so many of the guys like feeling threatened by each other or caught up in some bit of nonsense, which is of course like part of the fabric of the show. I always found the way that he responded to that just a delight to witness, because he was like, this is just so stupid. Like, these people are just being really weird and immature and dumb. And I'm an adult who is clearly the favorite here. And I have the confidence to like admit that and lean in. I don't know.
I don't know what I thought Michelle's type was, but I don't think I would have guessed that this was going to be her final two. Like, first of all, they're so different. But like, going back to the beginning of the season, I'm trying to think like who I thought was a front runner. It was clearly Nate and Joe going far from the beginning. But like, I don't know like what I thought her type was. I still don't think I completely know, because all three of these guys are like quite different from each other. And so is it about like feeling loved? Is it about feeling hot? Is it like, I don't know, there's like a playfulness. There's clearly a nervousness in her around Nate that she doesn't have with Brandon or Joe, where like you can tell that she's like, you could hear the butterflies, you know, in her voice. And I don't know, maybe it's just like exciting because it's different. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the things that she says about Nate feel much more definitive. Like you get across the entire episode, the soulmate question, could this person be my soulmate? Is this person soulmate material? But with Nate, it's when I'm with Nate, I feel how you're supposed to feel when you're with your soulmate, when you're with your person, right? She described kissing him as magical, right? I've never had a feeling like when I kiss Nate. Like this is just a different level of what they're sharing. And I honestly think like part of what she seems drawn to is that even though he is not this like overt rom-com romantic like Brandon is, in terms of the things he says and the speeches that he makes, he does still find a way to articulate something like quite meaningful about how he feels. Like I loved the moment in this episode where he said like the very subtle things that make each human being. I really like the subtle things that make you Michelle. Like that was very sweet. That's not just an emotional idea, but that's like an intellectual idea, right?
Totally.
And I think that appeals to her. Like I think she's just drawn to every aspect of Nate. My biggest question with Nate and Michelle in the future, because I assume that she will pick him, is
you can't pick Brandon. I'm sorry, you just can't.
I could see it. I've enjoyed listening to you and Callie debate this and have such staunchly opposed views. I really could see either outcome. I definitely think she will pick Nate because he just seems like she's into him more.
Yeah.
But is he going to move to Minnesota?
I don't know.
I think Brandon would go anywhere the second she asked.
Totally. I could see Michelle in Austin. I feel like she could thrive there.
But her whole life is in Minnesota.
I know, but maybe she doesn't want that. If she wanted that, maybe she would have picked Joe. Like maybe she's looking for something different. If the slice of home was what she was looking for, you know, then she would have picked it. I think she might want more of an adventure. She's, I think, lived in the Midwest her whole life. And, you know, Austin's a COVID hotspot, not in terms of the number of cases of COVID, but like people have moved there, including the comedy scene. Side note, are you aware of the show 20 Somethings on Netflix?
I have not seen this show. No.
It's just came out. It's like Netflix's version of The Real World. And it's set in Austin with like 4 men and 4 women.
Is it good?
It's okay. It's kind of weird. But anyway, I just thought it was like an accurate representation of like people moving to Austin during COVID. And I was like, yeah, many people.
Has Bob made an appearance? The cat at Liberty?
Not that I'm aware of. But
keep an eye out. Let me know.
Okay. Actually, in the show, they reference Pflugerville, which is where producer Erika is from, if I recall correctly. So I thought of Erika as I was watching. Anyway, I could see Michelle moving to Austin. I just can't see Nate as like a reliable boyfriend. Not because I don't think he's great. I would definitely hook up with Nate. I would love to like meet Nate in a bar and perhaps, you know, see what happens. But like Brandon, I wouldn't want to date Brandon, but I could see it much more easily than with Nate. But I guess like, I don't know, as someone who's also attracted to Nate, it's also like part of the charm, right? Like you can like tame him or something.
But see, it's funny because like I think that while I certainly agreed with the assessment in the prior Fantasy Suite pod that Nate has probably had an extraordinary amount of sex in his life, I can see him in a relationship, like partially just because he said it. He had that moment where he said like relationships are something I take really seriously. I don't play with this type of stuff. But I think because I don't know, he strikes me again as like very mature. Like I think that I don't know. I might be just a gigantic naive moron. I wouldn't say my fuckboy. Yeah, my fuckboy, my F-boy island fuckboy nice guy batting average wasn't super high in terms of being able to pick.
All of the guys on F-boy island were actually F-boys, but I just like fuckboys. So as like both friends,
Nate seems like respectful and mature and like ready to.
He doesn't engage in pettiness, but I just I think sometimes I'm just like, when people are so attractive, I'm just like, you can't possibly be monogamous. You're too hot. Like, I'm just like,
But he's had his fun, right? Presumably,
Sure.
and now he's ready for everything. I mean, all of the guys in the
That's true.
final three are good looking and have probably had very active love lives. So
Yes, I think that's fair to assume. Do you follow Nate on social media by any chance?
I haven't started following anyone from this season yet of the guys, but I do check in on them. So I've looked at his Instagram a few times.
So Nate and Rodney are really tight, and they have after Rodney got sent home, they posted a lot of videos together.
Yeah.
They were roommates together in California when they were filming in Palm Springs. And that
Love Rodney.
actually,
Rodney
me too.
is just a delight.
Love
What a
Rodney.
joy.
I think we all just want like happiness and love for Rodney. There's no question. But anyway, the fact that like they're so tight made me think that like also there's like a side to Nate, like a real like loyal and sort of like best friend vibe that we aren't completely getting because his confidence as it relates to being Michelle's lover so is like blocking out every other trait about him. But I thought that spoke really well. And I think that like in general, you want to end up with someone who's well liked by the other guys.
Mm-hmm.
And so that made me think that like maybe there's like a level, like a gear to Nate that perhaps you also aren't getting. I don't know why I'm like talking myself into Nate. I've been into Nate the whole time. Like
It's great.
I don't know why I turned on him. He's so hot. Also, I really liked his family. I loved his stepdad.
Oh my God.
I mean,
that conversation was so moving.
it was so
moving.
genuinely moving. Also, I do think that these hometowns, like to the extent they actually were hometowns, were some of the better ones, like in the history of the show. They seemed more authentic in a way. Even Joe's family, authentic in their lack of conversation. This episode is brought to you by Visible. Maybe you've already let your New Year's resolution slip. We all have, but you can still make a 2 years resolution with Visible. Right now, you can get a one-line wireless plan from Visible for just $20 per month for 24 months. 24 months is basically 4 bachelor seasons. That could be 4 engagements, 4 broken engagements. So many other couples we didn't see them coming. It's really an eternity in Bachelor Nation. And that's unlimited 5G data powered by Verizon with no annual contracts. Switch now at Visible.com and use the code Visible24. Don't miss out. Offer ends January 31st. New members only. Promotional rate with service on the Visible plan. For additional terms and network management practices, see Visible.com. This episode is brought to you by eBay Authenticity Guarantee. eBay knows that when it comes to jewelry, authenticity is the real gem. When you see the blue check mark that says Authenticity Guarantee, it means your next piece will be carefully inspired by jewelry experts and will always be worth its weight in gold. Whether you're looking to make a statement or build the perfect everyday look, eBay is making sure you get the real deal. With eBay Authenticity Guarantee, you can trust that jaw-dropping piece will always arrive jaw-droppingly real. Ensure your next purchase is the real deal. Visit ebay.com for terms.
This episode is brought to you by State Farm. You might say all kinds of stuff when things go wrong, but these are the words you really need to remember. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. They've got options to fit your unique insurance needs, meaning you can talk to your agent to choose the coverage you need. Have coverage options to protect the things you value most. File a claim right on the State Farm mobile app and even reach a real person when you need to talk to someone. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
Yes. Where are you? Obviously, this is a necessity currently because of COVID, right? But where are you in general in terms of how it impacts the structure and the flow of the show, of like having all of the finalists together, knowing where they are in the process, when the other people are going?
Right.
Like, I recall in the past that you weren't super into that and thought it was like weird. Am I remembering that correctly? Or are you in because of the drama?
I did think it was weird with Peter. For some reason with Peter's season, I think because maybe the women had such a hard time with it, like Hannah Ann and Madison. And who was his third? Can't recall. Anyway, I'll look it up. But I remember that Hannah Ann and Madison had a really hard time with it. And like it was mean. And I do think what used to happen is that they'd all be in the same place, but like separated. Like if you remember Colton's season.
Was it Victoria
F? I think you're right. Yeah, I think that's right. Forgot about her. Anyway, what used to happen is they would all be in the same place, but like staying in like separate like casitas or hotel rooms. They wouldn't like interact with each other. Like I remember when Colton ended things with Tayshia and Hannah G, they were like they had no idea what was going on, just like thought he was showing up. Whereas if it was, Peter's season, they were like all together. So I think the fact that they like have an awareness of like what's going on definitely makes them all more paranoid and contributes to it. And I actually think like the meanest thing they did this episode was the fireworks. Like it really sucks when you can when you're like, oh, Brandon's getting fireworks tonight, and like we're just like sitting in the hotel room like wondering what you're doing. They just do that not because it's like cool, but because it's, you know, stokes the anxiety and nervousness of whoever's not there. So I do think it's weird. Maybe I've just like come to accept it. And also it does seem like a little bit like a COVID thing of like, well, I'll just kind of keep it easier and, you know, keep you all in the same place. Although on the other hand, maybe you'd be like keep them separate so that, you know, there's less COVID mixing, but I don't know. I don't know. What do you think?
I think it's great TV, but almost unbearably awkward.
Well, I just like really don't like how they insist on this weird lie of it being
the
3
faux,
nights
I'm
in a row.
going to get ready on my date now.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. And also like, it's also like gross. It's not hygienic or safe.
I thought it was interesting that the guys, especially early, their vibe changed over the course of the episode, but they were kind of like giggly.
They're like
sort of
we're having sex this
unspoken
week.
thing. Yeah, exactly. And then one of the real shifts was when Brandon came back and they just asked like how it went, which I think would be the normal thing to ask, and he was very firm in his reply. Right, I'm not going to tell you details about what happened. I'm not going to tell you anything about yesterday. Went on a date. Like it was just so awkward. And you had like it was interesting to watch Nate sort of literally realize for the first time, right, as he is narrating to us that there are other relationships that are a part of this experience, that he's not the only one there, which was very funny. And Brandon really like making this kind of descent into, again, what I thought was kind of charming, but like real fear that he was going to go home, to the point where I honestly thought that when he pulled her aside, he was going to say to her,
I thought he was bowing out, like, I can't handle this, or like, I
No,
want you to be
no.
happy. I know it's not me, or whatever.
I thought he was going to say, because he obviously very, very badly wants to be there. I thought he was going to say, I don't want you to, I'm so sure it's me, and I don't want you to have to do that. Like, I don't want to put you through the pain of sending me home, so I will just go ahead and leave. That's what I thought was going to happen, because he puts her first, right? Put her first by sparing her the pain of that. But I guess he was just saying, I'm here for you. Want to make sure you're okay. Do you think there was more of that conversation we didn't see? Like, how long was an exchange like that?
There had to have been. I bet it was really long, just because of the level of crying. Like, I feel like she went from like 0 to 100 with the tears very, very quickly. So there had to have been more. And I do kind of feel like she changed her mind in that moment, because.
So what do you think caused that, if that is what happened? So you think she walked into the rose ceremony set on picking Nate and Joe, and then Brandon spoke to her and she changed her mind?
No, she seems more decisive than that. But I do think at some point it was Joe and not Brandon, and she changed her mind. She did seem like she had fun with him the next day. I mean, all the dates seemed like they went well. But didn't she say like she really learned a lot about Joe off camera? And like, didn't she say like overnight she learned a lot? And I was like, okay. So she actually got to see his real personality when he's not like feeling the pressure of the cameras. And I was like, great, they're ready to go.
Yes. She said that she always felt connected to him, but that, quote, today was on a different level. That was before they went to the fantasy suite. She said that waking up next to him was definitely something I could get used to. She said seeing who Joe was when the cameras were off, relaxed, fun, kind-hearted person. Joe's my slice of home, maybe my soulmate. I think, again, that in that moment, especially with the breakfast exchange about, so there's a next time, and the kind of like quiet little laugh of assent, that she had a fantastic time with him and thought this could be a person I could go back and build my life with. They both talked about the things they want to do to better the world. Like, I think they do genuinely connect on a lot of levels. And that with a little distance from that. Yeah. And the certainty that Nate was going to be one of the two, that whatever her pull is toward Brandon and the shape of a relationship and a life with Brandon, that just ultimately won out. Like, I don't think that she wasn't interested in Joe. She clearly liked him quite a bit, but Brandon pulled ahead. Maybe Brandon is just great in bed. What do you think?
I like, maybe maybe he's like really giving. Can't you see him being a real pleaser?
This Yes, this is my theory. In addition to all of the other things that are wonderful about Brandon, his personality, his nurturing spirit, I don't want to diminish any of that. That's all important and good. Clearly a family guy, caring, loves Michelle, very devoted to her. I think that there's a chance that Brandon is just like, I will just do whatever you need all night long.
Yeah.
Like when I say I'll put you first. You know that scene in Fleabag, season 2, where we get that like 9 times exchange? Yeah. I can see Brandon as a like 9 times guy, you know?
That has to be the most, I mean, that has to be it, right? Something, yeah. Or also conversely, Joe, I could see being like the opposite. And I just don't know if he's like as eager to make sure Michelle was having the best night of her life like Brandon probably was.
When we listen to Brandon again and think about the way that he just says whatever he feels and is really unafraid of how it will sound, like I think that Brandon is probably just totally uninhibited during sex. And did you watch The Good Place?
Yeah, of course.
So do you remember, this is obviously a little bit different, but you remember the moment where Tahani is explaining that Jason, because he has all of this unearned confidence and like doesn't think about his own absurdity, and the line ends like, therefore quite good at sex. I think there could be a little bit of that going on here. And I'm not saying Brandon is like Jason, but I don't think Brandon's absurd, to be clear.
You
but
don't think he's a Jaguars fan?
I have never heard Brandon shout Bortles, but I think that because he is just so comfortable saying this is what's on my mind, like you could just imagine Brandon saying things that most
a tender
people would be
lover,
so embarrassed to say in an intimate setting, and that maybe it is just like absolutely thrilling to hear that and then see him follow through on it. What a guy!
I also feel like Joe's so hot and like sexual that your expectations would be a lot higher, whereas with Brandon, I just feel like I would have fewer expectations. I wouldn't really be sure what to expect. Whereas with Joe, like it'd be something very, very specific. So I don't know. Maybe this is just all me projecting, but this is just like one of the biggest shockers of all time. And it's not that she didn't pick Joe, because I did have, misgivings about his likeliness to emote properly. But picking Brandon over Joe, I just cannot believe it. And I don't think the show wanted us to see it coming, because we had no indication that their relationship was slower. Actually, we had all the indications to the opposite, like all the guys wondering if she knew him before and her seeming into him and like all that. So it was like clearly just completely fabricated.
But in hindsight, weren't there a lot of clues that Brandon was a pretty legitimate contender? Like he met her family.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you think about the things that she's voiced in terms of like concerns or question marks about any of the guys, the ones that have come up about Brandon are pretty minor. It's like he pulled up in a bed wearing Air Jordans. Yeah. And my take on that is like, sounds like he shares a lot of my passions, spending time in bed and wearing Air Jordans. Now, I don't like to put shoes in bed, to be clear, but separately, those are two things that I love deeply. I don't know. I mean, she's liked Brandon really for a good stretch of this. They've had a very deep and meaningful connection. I think the show is always edited to trick us a little bit, right? Like even just the preview for the finale, it's like, aren't these going to end up being like stitched together Frankenbites to make us think that her family doesn't think Nate is serious about or ready to get married, and it'll all end up being okay, and that's who she'll pick and he'll propose and they'll be engaged? Like it just feels like the outcome is pretty clear, and they've had to introduce via the editing some other elements to make it less predictable. Nate was the first impression, Rose, as you've noted many times as a scholar of this franchise. Like often on The Bachelorette, the first impression, Rose, ends up being the winner. Like
yeah, seriously. I think I can see Michelle and Nate together in Austin, because I feel like she can be Mrs. Coach. Like I just feel like she could very easily be, Connie Britton for this generation.
I mean, Connie Britton is one of the greatest icons in the history of television.
Specifically, Mrs. Coach, teacher in the Texas area. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, Michelle is an icon, and Tammy Taylor is an icon. Two icons.
Also, there's something
I do
about
think she wants to be in Minnesota, though. I don't know. There's been a lot of like, could you see yourself here? Including with Nate on the lake.
I know.
In his orange swim trunks.
But they're so great. And the answer is yes, because he goes, he's on the lake in Texas. Also, he's from Canada, so he can handle the cold weather, which I think is good. That's important. Minnesota, I've never been to Minnesota, but I hear the winters are no joke, so that's good as well. I don't know. But I think if she really was like, I need to stay in Minnesota, like right now, maybe they'll return to it, then she would have picked Joe. Like, I think it says a lot that the fact that he reminded her from home wasn't enough. And that like he reminded her from home, but she still went on these shows to like find something different. Right. So,
but I think you can have both things where that place and your life there can be important to you and you want to build something new there with a person who hasn't been a part of that so far. Right.
Sure. But I'm just saying, I think like maybe Minnesota is not as important to her as you might think. But I don't know. Who's to say? I mean, I do feel that it's weird that she like, if any of these kids who are purportedly her students actually were her students and they came on the show, I think that's a little bit weird. I'm anti that, as I've stated many times. But
yes,
whatever she wants. What have you thought of this season in general? Like, what have been the highs for you?
I've really enjoyed it. I love Michelle. I think she's awesome. She's just incredible. I was watching it live for the first few weeks, and then I had a few weeks in the middle where I wasn't able to watch in the moment just because of schedule conflicts, and then kind of caught up. So I think my feel for the season is a little bit off because I binged a few episodes in a row, which always sort of impacts the sense of the passage of time and how long the relationships have been where they are. So for example, I'm like, I left this having like a very concentrated burst of Clayton because the episodes where he got time were the episodes that I binged in like one, Saturday. And I'm like, oh, this guy. Okay.
I'm hearing good things about his season, and I thought his teaser looked very good.
So I know you've talked about this already, but I have to discuss this with you for a minute.
Okay.
I was intimate with both of you moment in the teaser. Surely
cannot be the end
because they would not spoil for us who the fantasy suite participants are, right? They can't be. So that has to be earlier in the run.
I think it has to be earlier in the run. They did tease the fence jump like for weeks upon weeks, if you recall. Right. But then you just knew something big was coming. You didn't know who it was about. If they did that, I would be really shocked. So it has to be earlier on. Or they stitch together a couple different reaction shots so that you think it's one thing, but it's something else.
Right. Yeah.
But like, why would he have to tell us someone that he's been intimate with them? Like, what would be the reason?
I don't know.
Like,
I don't know.
Also,
I don't know.
I guess Caitlin did do that when she hooked up with Nick. I think she told Sean, and she felt really bad. And I think she told everyone. I'm really sorry. I don't completely remember right now. My brain is dead. But like she did tell people, but it wasn't like a one-on-one. I think she told a bunch of the guys together, if I recall correctly. And by the way, I support it. Like, fine.
Yeah,
have sex,
of
people.
course. Yeah. Consenting adults, go for it.
Exactly. Do what you want to do.
Maybe maybe that's the rose ceremony after like a chastity challenge or something. I have no idea why you would feel compelled to say that in that setting. None at all. I'm glad you mentioned Caitlin though, because I was struck by during the beach stroll chat between Caitlin and Michelle at the beginning of the episode that she said to her, really pay attention to those fears with Nate because I wish I did that a little bit more. That's
shots fired
kind of comment
at Sean.
Shots fired at Sean, but like it feels like that's the kind of thing that could also really, I mean, Michelle is an independent thinker and is going to make her own decision, but that's ammo, that's something that could really leave a mark and an impression on somebody when they're trying to make the decision between two people at the end, or three people in this case.
I really wonder how much Caitlin and Tayshia interact with the guys, because if Chris Harrison, didn't really interact with the contestants that much, except like when they needed something, he like would do fun activities wherever they were when he didn't have to work or whatever. And so I wonder if like they interact with the men more. I'm guessing no, but is Caitlin saying that based on what she's heard about Nate from Michelle, or based on like other like producer feedback? Like what's Caitlin's level of knowledge?
That sequence, at least it was just in direct response to Michelle saying that she was worried about whether Nate would be ready and whether she will have fallen for him more than he has for her. And then Caitlin responded with really pay attention to that. So that was the kind of comment that could definitely bear out in some way in the future.
I thought that the way Tayshia talked to the guys in the beginning was also just like very strange. I just thought like she was like giving them like a pep talk about like the fantasy suites and like how to use the time. And I was just like, they know, they're fine. They don't need this. Also, I felt like if that pep talk was coming from like Chris Harrison, it would have been really weird. And so it was like kind of strange scripting for Tayshia. I'm sure she didn't write it. It wasn't on her, but it was just like a weird positioning of like the pep talk she gave them. I wasn't into it.
On the one hand, I find like, I think it would be bizarre if everybody on the show was just talking about sex more, because that would be like uncouth, right? Like you know, keep private things private.
Yeah.
But I also find the way that they like dance around the thing that everybody knows is happening, and it's so strange. And you felt it often in this episode again, because the guys were kind of like giggling and smirking and hiding their faces from each other in the camera. It's like, we all get it. Like, people are going to have sex this week. Like, sex is a thing that adults engage in. It's okay. Sex. But I don't know. By the way, though, because we're on Tayshia for a second, I haven't been able to
talk about her and Zach's breakup.
Talk about Zach's breakup. I mean, you know how I feel about Zach, and you know how I felt about them as a couple. I'm despondent.
Well, there's an opening for you. There's an opening for you and Zach. Maybe he wants to join your marriage as a throuple. He's welcome at any time. I think they must have been broken up for a while, and they just like timed it up so that they like ran the marathon together. Probably didn't want to, and then discussed it.
They seemed so happy at the marathon. That was part of what made it so painful.
I'm sure that was not real.
Oh boy, you're such a skeptic, and I, like Brandon, and I'm a hopeless romantic. You know,
I'm a hardened soul. I'm just a hardened soul. Living
talk about how much I love things.
New York City. I'm just like, I don't know. I've lost my childlike wonder. One day I'll get it back. Maybe, you know, it's like Christmas is coming. I feel like that's what happens at Christmas. Is like your hardened shell dissolves, and like your soft center is supposed to like see the light of day. Maybe that'll
like
happen to me.
M&M live read or something.
It's like a Cadbury cream egg or something. Yeah. Well, I love
Cadbury cream eggs.
I love candy. I love sweets of all kinds. I actually like went to a store today and like bought candy on the way home.
What kind of candy?
I got some pretzel M&Ms and a bag of, I love pretzel M&Ms. I got a bag of mini Tates. I love the mini Tates bags. I love Tates cookies, obviously.
But that's not candy.
No, it's not. But they had both. They had both.
You're just talking more broadly about confections and sweets.
Well, this is what I bought at the bodega in the candy section. Those were both there. Right. And then I also got some other M&Ms for the freezer for later. Peanut butter.
Delicious.
I love M&Ms. Just wonderful candy.
Maybe you can get a sponsorship here. You know,
I'd love to if anyone's listening. Mallory, give you this season a letter grade from A to F.
Boy. B+?
Okay.
Right?
I'm gonna give it a B-.
I think here's what I would say to try to talk you up a bit from the B-. I think the season's been really strong, and you're just feeling fatigue from how many seasons there have been in a row and how many there will be in a row.
I think it's also just that the front runners were so obvious.
Yeah.
From the beginning. So
it's true.
There hasn't been a lot of like phases. Like often on the show, it's like, oh, this is phase 1. Here are the contestants we care about. Phase 2, we move into like...
Yeah. The top 5 or 6 guys seemed very apparent.
They dominated for very long
early
time.
In the run. Yeah.
Because a lot of them sucked. The pizzapreneur, I mean, he wasn't going anywhere. Duh. Mallory.
Boy. Juliet.
Thank you so much for joining me. For more Mallory, you can check her out on Ringerverse. You can check her out on the Ringer NFL show. And many other podcasts, because she's all over our network. Erika Cervantes, thank you for producing this episode. Callie and I will be back after Tuesday night's episode. It'll be the last episode of the year before the big Clayton season in January. Have a great weekend, and thank you all for listening.